welcome to Guided Project 5-2, the last of the guided projects that are required for our course. This time we are going to be working on a completely different level. Beginner access is now behind you. You can create tables, you can create queries, you can create forms and reports, you can lock down these tables and secure your information. You're in a really good place right now. You are now done with the basics, but the basics were pretty advanced to begin with. There's only one chapter of things that would be considered intermediate that you're going to have to look at, and this is because these two things are just very, very common. There's no way to let you out of a course without being able to work with these two things. The first is a type of relationship that we haven't dealt with in the past. Back in Chapter 2, we talked about the relationships you build between tables, and oftentimes you have each item can link up to many items in another table. However, what happens if both tables link up to one another in a very, very complex way where you can have many on each side? We're going to look at that in this chapter, and we're also going to look at macros. You might remember macros if you've gone through the Excel series, and macros were relatively simple. You just recorded them back then. This is a very different thing when you hit Access, so we're going to look at the new advanced version of macros that you'll see in Microsoft Access. Let's get started on the last of our projects. We'll head to SimNet as always, and you will see the instructions ready to be loaded up on screen. As always, Adobe Reader will be placed at the top of my screen. And don't be intimidated by the fact that what's going to open up is 5 pages of instruction. It is a lot of instruction. However, it's instruction in the way that you might be reading a novel and you see lots of dialogue. It reads really quick. These instructions are very tiny. Lots of them are things like clicking OK or clicking Next. So don't be intimidated by the fact we see a 5-page instruction set. We're going to open up the start file too. Remember, no way around the smart file. I'm sure by now everybody knows that you're doing your own work, but there's no way for us to turn this off. And you're going to see a database open, and it will have 2 tables. In one of the tables, we will have information about authors, right here. In the other, we are going to have information about books. And what they really want us to understand is that each of the authors could be linked to many books. Authors write more than one book during their lifetime, so that's logical. Books can be linked to more than one author. You always have people teaming up to write things together. There are some famous combinations, like Peter Straub and Stephen King often work together. It happens all the time in academics, even including husbands and wives working on books together. So a book can have more than one author. So authors have more than one books. There's part of our many relationship. Books can have more than one author. There's the other half of our many relationship. How are we going to build a relationship between these two? Let's go through the basics in the steps. We all should, at this point, know the startup, where we will do a save as. And when that opens up, we are going to choose to save in our Documents folder. And even if you think that you're there, make sure that you click on the Documents link. I'm waiting for mine to open. So we see the Documents link over here. Make sure you click it just to be safe. Make sure the name fits, and if you have an instructor given name, choose that instead of what they give you and click Save. So now we're done with the first 2 steps, and as usual, 3 is to enable the security. The warning, the Enable Content button. And we're ready to get to work. Notice this is a very different first step. They're going to tell us to review the existing tables. So all of those first steps, A through H, is just looking at what's in the tables. So let's open up the book table, and we'll be opening that in Datasheet view, which happens to be the default. And you'll see that we have a number of books here, and it's a total of 10. And it gives the ISBN, which is a unique book number that a company can assign to a book. I'm going to switch to Design view. And you'll see that we have this ISBN category lists as the primary key. You can see the key in here. And you might remember from Chapter 2, a primary key is something that is pre-sorted in a special way so that all the data links to it as this is the primary connection, and it's indexed in a way so that it can access that information quicker than it can look up things in any of the other fields. We have this primary key, which is the ISBN number, so we know that it's unique, and you'll see that it's 13 characters long. You'll also notice that it's just 13 characters. It actually formats them in a special way using this input mask. That's a little bit beyond what we'll need to do for our course, but you'll notice that it's just numbers left in there. So now we're going to open the author table so we can see what the other one looks like. And here we have a number of authors. You can see 18 as it's auto-numbered them. And each of these authors have some connection to the books that we saw. So in this case, these 18 authors may have linked up with 2 or 3 of the other books each. So what we have to do is we have to start thinking about the relationships between them. Notice here that auto-numbered thing where we just numbered the 18 authors, 1 through 18. That auto-number is the primary key over here. So the quickest way to look up something in this table is to look it up by its ID. And this one, notice it's a type of number, a long integer. So on one side, we had the string of characters that looked like numbers with dashes and such. On the other side, we have a long integer. And what we want to do is we want to come up with some way to describe the many-to-many relationship that's in them. So one author could have many books, one book could have many authors, and we might be connecting each table, each record in each table might be connecting with many of the items in the other table. That's what really step 5 is all about. They're summing up what I just said. Book could have many authors, an author could have written many books. So here's many to many. This looks like the simplest possible step that you could have in something like this, but it's also the most important. You usually don't build your database while you're making the decisions on what you're going to build. Step 5 is trying to get you into the habit of saying, what do I have here? How do I design it? Before you start clicking anything, this is what you should be doing. You should be thinking it through and figuring out the problem. We're going to close both tables as they tell us in instruction 6. And I will right-click on them to close. I prefer this because sometimes you can't always tell what you're using with the X on the far right. I'll close that one. And the answer to our problem, how do we describe many-to-many in a world that doesn't have a many-to-many option, and a lot of database software doesn't have it. There's a quick workaround on this, and it's called a junction table, sometimes called an intersection table. And what this is it's a table that we create which specifically links the primary keys of the two tables that we're looking to relate. What we'll end up doing is we will create a table that has one record for every relationship in this mess of books and authors. So we will have, say a book has 3 authors, there will be 3 records, one for that book with the first author, one for that book with the second author, and a third with that book for the third author. And it'll do that for every possible combination of books and authors. And this is called the junction table. And we're going to do this by creating a table from scratch. Chapter 1 kind of stuff, do the create, and we'll do table in design mode so that we can create this table from scratch. And we're only going to need 2 things in it. One is the primary key from the books table, which is, we'll call it ISBN, and we'll stick FK at the end for foreign key, because that key is coming from somewhere else. Remember, that was a short text data type. Then in the description, we'll just remind everybody what this is for the future. This, if anyone were looking at this table, they know that this field must match an ISBN in the book table. Now we're going to move to the next field, and we're going to link to the other table. We want that table's primary key. That's the author ID, and we'll stick on the -FK so we remember that that's some other table's key. And remember, this one listed as a long integer when we looked at it. We're just going to say number, And in its description, just like the one above, this one must match an ID in the author table. Now we could add another, but there's just no need for that. And now we're going to do something that is unique to this sort of situation. Well, I shouldn't say unique, but most commonly found in this sort of situation whenever it happens. We are going to make what is called a concatenated key. Concatenation is just a fancy way of saying that you're going to glue two things together, two or more things. And it's used all the time in programming when you're starting to stick words and phrases together. What we're going to do is we're going to have to identify one or the other of these as a key, or so you would think. We're going to click and hold the mouse button down on the first foreign key. We'll move down to the second foreign key and let go. We've chosen both foreign keys. Well, now how do we decide which is more important? Which do we make the primary key? Will we be looking up authors more? Will we be looking up books more? There's absolutely no way to tell, but we don't have to make that decision. What you can do is if you choose two foreign keys like this, you can turn them into a concatenated key in which both of them count. Both of them will be treated equally. All you have to do is hit the primary key button to do it. Notice here there's nothing at the moment. When we hit primary key with both selected, then it puts the primary key symbol in front of both. So now we have a primary key that consists of two of these keys from our table. You almost never do this in tables, but in this case, it is exactly what you need in order to make up for the fact that the many-to-many relationship is such a strange situation. So now we have those two. We've clicked the primary key button, and we've created this key. Now all we have to do is save the table that we just made. Save our junction table, our intersection table. It's going to ask us for a name, and logically, if one table is called author and the other is book, let's just call this one author book. No space in the middle. And I'll OK it. So now we see a new table appears over here on our tables list within the database. We have another table ready to join author and book relationships together. So it's kind of like a man-in-the-middle sort of situation where this will take care of processing how the many things relate to the many. We're going to actually make things a little easier on our users. One of the things that we always say is you don't want to give people access to the tables directly, and you do want to make things as simple as possible for the people that are using your database. So we're going to add something that you've probably seen 1,000 times on various web pages. When you click the little arrow next to something, it's going to drop down a whole bunch of options for us. We see this all the time when we're using Access, when we do something like create this button and we have all these options down below. We're going to create something like that anytime that this field is supposed to be filled out. It's called a lookup, where it is going to go to the table and look up the options. We can't really enter anything directly into here unless we know that there's a match in the book table. There's a match in the author table, which would mean we'd have to open up the author table or the book table and go look it up ourselves, make sure that it's already in there, add it if it isn't, and it starts to become a very complex process. Access can take care of that for us by doing a lookup. And we're just going to choose the author ID field. This is the foreign key. And currently it's a number. We're going to go down to the end and we're going to say we want the lookup wizard. And that's going to walk us through some steps which will allow this table to look up its information from another table. So you can choose the information. You can't enter it, but you can choose it from a pre-existing list. So I click Lookup Wizard, and you'll see that something new opens up. It wants to get information from us. How are we going to look up this information? First, we want to say that we want to look up this lookup field. We want to get those values from another table or query. We could manually put in the couple options that we wanted. Say you had a business in 3 states and you didn't have any table that specifically listed them. You could enter the names of the 3 states and then everybody would choose just between those. But we want to go to another table. In this case, since we're editing the author ID option, it's going to go to the authors table. So we'll say we're going to get it from another table or query. I click Next, and I make sure you can see the instructions as we go. It obviously is going to be the author table, since we're looking up the author ID foreign keys. And we'll click Next. Now it wants to know what is the item that we will look up. The foreign key author ID should be the ID from here. So we move ID over. And then we're going to do something extra. This is the primary thing that we're going to look up. We're going to add other things to the list. If they saw that seemingly random number and say you wanted to look up an author and it said 17, well, which author is number 17? We have no idea which author is 17. So what we do is we are going to add the first name and the last name categories. Be careful when you do this yourself. Notice first name comes lower on the list. They want you to do first name and then last name. So go down to first name, send that over, then go to last name, send that over. And what this will do is it will still look everything up by ID because that's the one that you listed first. But when people are trying to enter information into your intersection table, your junction table, this will automatically put a little arrow on the author side, and when they click down on that author, it'll show the ID, but it'll also show the first and the last name of that author so that you can pick more easily. I click Next, and now we want to see how should we sort this. In this case, I'm going to choose the last name field. Having them come from like number 1 up to number 18 doesn't make all that much sense because you still don't know which number goes with which author. That's just some hidden internal digit thing. But you do know their last name. So what we'll do is we will sort them by last name and leave it as ascending. And we'll hit Next. So now they're going to come pre-sorted, which shows you what the list is going to look like. Here's all the B's for the last names. Here's the C's, the G's. So it's alphabetical order. And there's an option here that's chosen by default, Hide Key Column. Throughout the series, they're going to recommend that you get rid of this Hide the Key Column. It does cause some troubles. It might not mean anything to the people that are listing these drop-down options, but the series always recommends that you get rid of this Hide Key Column check mark. So they're going to tell you to make sure that you get rid of that. So then we hit Next. And it's going to specifically say, when you look that up, what should they store in our junction table, our author book table. So we want the ID, the primary key there. And now it's going to ask us a couple pieces of information. First, they give us a sample name that we can use, a pretty good name. We have Enable Data Integrity. You might remember from Chapter 2, data integrity is when you start looking at every matchup to make sure that if you say there has to be one of these in this column, that there really is. If you delete something that's related to other tables, it deletes it in the other tables too. You modify something somewhere, it modifies it there. So this is what data integrity is all about. So we want to turn that on. And right now, it's set to really not letting us delete. Here we're going to have a cascade delete where you have the option of deleting, but if you delete it in one place, you delete it in everywhere that it's connected. And we'll say Finish. Now it's going to give us some warning that we have to save the table that we were making, this junction table. We'll say yes. And now we've established that this is a number, but it's going to be looked up from a different table. Your options won't be type a number in this box. Your options will be click this little arrow and pick from the list. We're going to do the same thing for the other, so this should be pretty familiar. As I said, this is kind of a fast-moving reading dialogue sort of section. It's not like a big chunky description of a novel. We're moving pretty fast here. We're going to go into the ISBN foreign key in our junction table, and we're going to do the lookup wizard for this. Again, we're getting them from another table. This time it'll be the book. Scroll down just so you can see. And I've clicked Next. I've clicked the book table where it comes from. Click Next. I want the ISBN number. We're also going to give the title because the ISBN number is just a bunch of digits. People won't know which book we're talking about unless we give the title. We'll just make sure that we keep that on top. We'll do next. According to their instructions, we don't care about any sort of sorting. So we'll just hit next and leave those blank. We'll deselect that hide key column again, as they always recommend. And you'll notice that the title doesn't fit. Right now, if we were to have this drop down, it would cut it off at this point. You can use the same trick that you use in Excel and Access when you're dealing with this. Point to the very edge, and I know your instinct might be drag it to a new place, but remember, if you double click, it automatically fits it. Now this one does scroll off a little bit, but that's just because we're out of space in this dialog box that we're in. So we've clicked that, and we hit next, which is our field. The primary key was ISBN. So that's the value that we'll store here. And now we're at the same end of process option here. We turn on data integrity, and you will make sure that Cascade Delete is chosen, so that if they delete it, it deletes the connected records. And then we're done. We click Finish. We're going to have to save this table also, and then you'll get the warning that this table has changed. So we'll say yes. We're the ones who are changing it, of course. And we are now 2 pages in, and we have created our junction table. They even tell us at this point, step 10, close the table. It's time to get visual with this. Let's see what we've created. So we're going to edit this relationship. I'm going to start going full screen on this probably. We need to do relationship view, where you go to database tools and you can view your relationships. When I open this, fits on the screen just fine. When you open this, you can see our 3 tables. Here's author with its primary key. Here's book with its primary key. And here's our junction table with our concatenated key, which is part the book and part the author. This one has a one-to-many relationship. This one has a one-to-many relationship. So we could have many relationships involving books, many relationships involving the authors, and our junction table, our intersection table, will juggle all those various relationships so that instead of doing many-to-many, it juggles the many-to-many thing by being many here and many there. But it only works because it's the table in the middle juggling the 2 other tables. Important concept to get. We just have to tweak one thing on this, and that's what the next couple steps are about. You might remember that when we looked at relationships in Chapter 2, we were looking at the data integrity in 2 ways. One of them is that when you delete something, all the related materials are deleted. And if you look at the option to modify, if you modify, then it's modified in all related tables as well. We didn't have an option for modifying, so what we're going to do is we're going to have to add that to the relationships. That involves clicking on the relationship, and you can see that there's a thin connection between these thick pieces on the sides. We're going to click it, and you can tell you've got it because now the entire thing is thick. And we're going to use the Edit Relationships option at the start of this Design tab. That's the same dialog that you see when 2 different things are being connected in the first place. And you'll see Cascade Update is currently turned off. We never had an option to turn that on, so we're going to turn it on. Cascade Option checkbox. We'll click OK. And now we'll save the relationship. And this will make sure that if you update an author ID, that it gets updated over here. So if you deleted it, then it would delete it. That was ready to go. This, if you update it, now you update it over here. We have to do the same thing with the other side. So I select it. A second way to do Edit Relationship is just right-click on the link after you've selected it. We'll turn on Cascade Update. We'll click OK. And we'll save. So here we did this for the author in the original steps. And then we're going to, here we're doing it for the book. So you can see it's a little tough. Now I think I've got it on screen so you can see that we intentionally were doing it twice. Here's where we did it the first time. Here's where we did it the second time. Now we can we can save again. And we can close the relationship windows. So now we've built a many-to-many relationship. We did it by using this junction table, but now we're going to have to go in and talk about how they connect. So we have a table ready to go, and we just have to add the data to it. And they've given us a whole bunch of options to choose. If you remember doing this in some of the earlier projects, it just seemed as though there was a ton of typing to be had. And just looking at this table, you might cringe the moment that you see all this data. It's like, oh God, am I going to have to type all that? Now you don't. You open up author book, and you have to put your first pairing in. So we want the book Business Driven Technology to show that Paige Baltzan has written it. A lot of typing? Well, no. You click the arrow now, and you choose from all of your books. Business Driven Technology. Who wrote it? Ones that we have to. I think I'm going to get trouble over here because I'm using video at the same time. Don't worry about those warnings. You shouldn't have them on your side. I switched to the author ID. Now we have to just find Paige Baltzan at the list. You'll see it does list the keys over here. That seems meaningless, but we leave them in. We say Paige Baltzan wrote it, and it'll choose the 7 for us. Now we hit enter, and we can move on to the next book. M Information Systems. M Information Systems was written by the same author, Paige Baltzan, and she's up here. So what you have to do is, I'm going to go full screen on the instructions. What you have to do, I'm going to pause the video for a minute, give you time to do all of this selection. I was almost said typing, but it's not typing anymore. Get all these various connections in. Notice that here's a book with 2 authors. We've seen an author up here with 2 books. We're describing many-to-many relationships, and we're able to use this drop-down thanks to the lookup. We're able to use this drop-down to do it. So pause the video, and in a minute we'll come back to this, get all this typing done, and we'll pick up with the next step as soon as your intersection table is filled out. All right, we're back. Hopefully you're able to fill out this long list of book-author relationships. If you had trouble with the last one, author 17, Ray Whittington, notice that when you do select, you might have not realized that you have a little scroll bar on the side. So there are more authors down near the bottom. If you were missing Ray Whittington, that's where he was hidden, down at the bottom. Once you've done this, you've described every relationship that there is between any book and its author, any author and his or her books. All you have to do now is close the table, and hopefully as you do, you realize just how much time you saved, not just from typing in general, but also from all the repeat typing when you would have had to type the names of the books many times, the ISBN number many times. So the lookup has taken a bit of time to create in the table, but it saved us a mountain of time when we're entering the data, and it has the added benefit of protecting the tables themselves from the users so that they don't have to keep opening up all your tables, looking through all your data to try to get these ISBN numbers and author IDs. So now we have a pretty good relationship going. We finished 3 of the almost 5 pages pretty quickly at this point. Now we're going to start to view to see this relationship in action. We looked at the author table before and we saw it was just a list of authors. They want us to open up the author table again and just see what's changed. Now that there's a relationship, we get the little plus sign over here and it'll tell what each thing is related to. We're going to go to Paige again. Paige Baltzan, author 17, author 7, and she has a little plus next to her name, and when we click it, we see the 2 books that she was involved in. So this is a quick way to pair up what it is that we see in the sheet with what's involved behind the scenes. Notice when we do author book, it's worth mentioning, I'm opening this up, you don't have to do this again. If I were to choose this, we see the author ID and the names. When we open up one of these, we see the the ISBN number and the title, but I'm just going to close this. When you see it over here, the relationship will just tell what it's related to as a foreign key. So we're not going to have the full title here. When we do the same with the authors, we're not going to have the author's name. All we're doing is we're showing which foreign key it associates with. So notice here's an author, but they're associated with a book-related foreign key. Here's another one that they want us to look at, Michael Wesson. He doesn't have a book in the database, but he's still an author there. So when it describes what ISBN numbers he's related to, nothing comes up. So if you had one, it'll show one. You have more than one, it'll show all of them. But if you have none, it'll just show a blank box. So they're showing that you've clearly established your many-to-many relationship. You could do the same thing. I'm going to close the table as they tell me. This is an added step that they don't actually ask you to do, but I'm going to open up the book table also, and you'll see that these also have the plus signs that will show which author ID was involved in the writing of the book. All books you would think would have an author, but this one doesn't. There's no author on the list that it's associated with. Here we have 2 authors for a book that had multiple authors. So that you'll see the exact same thing in the book table. Remember, this was extra. The instructions don't tell you to open up the book table and check it out, but I just want to make sure you see it works both ways, because at this point we're done with the many-to-many relationship. We have covered the first core area that Chapter 5 is all about. We have established a many-to-many relationship between these 2 different things. It's worth noting that the authors in books like this aren't the only examples. Maybe you have a catalog of car parts, and every car has many, many parts. Every part could be used in many cars. For instance, maybe every small car from General Motors uses the same headlight. So that headlight would be linked to many cars. There are tons of times where this happens, so even though this is up to the intermediate skills, it happens so frequently. This is one of the intermediate skills you really have to leave if you're going to be ready for action. The other thing that they're talking about are macros, and macros are like mini programs that you can run with the click of a button. In Access, you don't even need to click the buttons at times. You can connect these in various ways so that they automatically happen when you open up your database. They can happen when you open up a table, when you try to edit information in a table. You can have macros automatically running without anybody having to click any button to make this happen. This is really different than when we saw them in Excel in the past. We're going to create a macro, and you'll even see that we create them in a different way. There's no record macro option here. We're heading to the Create tab because we're going to create a macro. And macros are the last area here. We're going to hit the macro button. What we want to do is every time that we open up the database, like we start up our computer, we start up Access, we double click to open up this database that we've just been working on, we want it to automatically open the author and the book tables. Normally it opens and it's just a blank area down here. So we're going to write something that will open the 2 of them up without the user having to do anything. So I click macro and something really weird starts opening up. We have something called macro 1, and all these options for program flow and actions and such. This is really just an interface where you can do programming without having to know a bit of programming. The simplest thing to do is to realize is in our programming code, one of the things we'll have a comment. So I'm going to click here, and this tells all the different things that we can use. Here's these closed database options, finding records, going to controls, beeping. We're just going to insert a comment. And it will show us what we need to fill in order for the comment to be there. For a comment, we're just going to say, what does this macro do? This action opens the author table. Notice the period is in red, so include it. And now we have a comment. If I were to tab out of there, it will appear in green so that we know that it's a comment. This isn't any sort of action the program will do. This is just us reminding us what we're doing. And every time you have some sort of action, you should throw one of these comments in. Imagine yourself 3 weeks from now trying to figure out how your macro works. If you don't put the comments, you're going to have to figure it out from scratch. You'll also notice if you have some programming background, the slash asterisk and asterisk slash. So this, if you have a programming background, it should be familiar too. Now, what happens? How do we open a table? Well, we're just going to add a new action, the first real action. And you'll see that as you go through alphabetically, one of the things that you can program it to do is to open a table. So I'll click that, and it asks us which table. We can avoid the programming just by filling in these different options. Which table do we want? I'll use the drop-down arrow, and we want, according to the instructions, we want author. What view do we want it to have when we open? Well, let's go do datasheet view. And in terms of editing, make sure that editing is chosen so that we're allowed to get into the data. And we are done with that entire programming step. Be careful, there's an X over here if we wanted to get rid of this step altogether. Sometimes you want to close your macro and you'll accidentally hit this X by accident, so really watch out for that. That's one of the reasons I like doing it by right-clicking. But we're not going to close it yet. We have given the instruction to say open the author table. We still have to open the book table. So we're going to do another comment, and we're going to say that the next step, this action opens the book table, and we'll include the period. And we will go down to the next action. So we've given the comment, now we actually have to carry out the action to open the table. Which table do we want? Well, this time we want the book table. Before we said author, now we want book. And then again, we'll choose the datasheet view, which is already chosen in edit mode. And our macro is done. That's all it takes. There's no record button, there's no programming, and you can do an awful lot more here than you could do that way. All we have to do is save it. I'm going to click save in the upper corner. It's going to ask us a name, and this is actually a really important step. You could miss the importance of this, especially if you were trying to skim through the instructions without the videos and such. AutoExec runs whenever you open up a database. If you choose the name AutoExec, and you can only choose it once, if you choose AutoExec, that program will run when you open up your database. So I'm going to click OK, and it will save it. And of course, after we close it, they're going to have us test it. That's pretty predictable. It says close access. Technically, that's a bit of a waste. I'm going to do File and Close. You're welcome to close access altogether if you want, but closing the database is more than enough. We have nothing open here. What they want us to do is to go back and open the file that we were just working on. So I'm going to do File, Open, and my recently listed ones will be here. I'll double click on that to open it up. And you'll see this time it opens, and here's our author table, open and ready to go. Here's our book table, open and ready to go. Before we had to double click on those. So now it automatically runs the AutoExec macro that we just wrote in the previous steps, and that AutoExec causes these to automatically open up for us and make life a little bit easier if what we do every time is jump into these and start editing. One word of warning, this is also one of the things that makes macros so dangerous, and the reason why we've had issues with how you save your files and having to enable macros in different places. You could create an AutoExec macro that did something malicious, and somebody would just be innocently opening up a database, and this malicious macro would run. Maybe it's starting to delete things, screw up the record somehow, replace data. AutoExec makes it a little bit dangerous. So now you can understand a little bit why there have been so many warnings about that. We're going to close both tables here, according to step C. And we're gonna see what happens if we screw around with the macro. What if you ask the macro to do something that isn't possible? I'm going to take the book macro, excuse me, the book table, and I'm going to change its name. I right-click on it, and you'll see that there is a rename option somewhere near the top. And I'm going to change it to book test. I'm just putting the word test on because I don't really want to change it permanently. We're just doing this so that we can see what happens. Now we're going to close the database. You're welcome to close down all of Access if you prefer, that's fine. And now when I open it up, we get an error. Microsoft Access can't find the object book. Remember, when we made the macro, it said which table should we open? And first we said author. Which table should we open the second time? We said book. Well, now there's no table called book. So we've got an error here. See up here, we've got a copy of that exact warning. When we click OK, the macro went as far as it could possibly go, and then it hit an error. When it does, it gives you that warning and clicks into single step mode, where your macro is still running, but it's going to tell you what the situation is right as you hit the error. So it told us that the error is in auto exec, which makes sense. That's what we named the one that we wrote. We know that's what it should be. The problem that it had trouble with was opening a table. The arguments that were given in was we want the book table in datasheet mode ready to edit. We could look this over, try to figure out what the problem is. Book? Oh, we don't have one called book. Maybe we could figure it out on our own. The other option is we have an error number here, 3270. If we really couldn't figure out what was available through the information they give us, you could search either in the Access Help, or sometimes you could use Google or Bing or Yahoo, search engines like that, to look up what Access error number 3270 is. But most of the time you can figure out what's going on just through this. Now, we don't want to get into the whole editing and fixing everything. We're just going to say, okay, we've got our information. Let's stop all the macros, and we'll close the table that was already open. What we have to do is we have to figure out what happens if that actually comes along. Now, we could fix book test back to book and everything would be fine. But what happens in the real world when other people are using this? What if it's not our mistake, it's theirs? Perhaps somebody accidentally deleted the table, which would be a disaster. That's one of those things where you're just not going to be able to fix it with renaming. What we need to do is we need to add something called error handling to the macro. What error handling is you intentionally look for mistakes, and if it's a mistake of a certain type, then you handle it a specific pre-programmed way. If not, then you'll just let whatever the regular process would have been. So we're going to intercept the error before the user sees it. To do this, we're going to head to AutoExec, and we're going to right-click on it and go into Design View. This will let us change AutoExec. We're going to add error handling to it. Here's our open table 1. Here's our open table 2. We're going to create something called a sub-macro. What a sub-macro is it's just as Access can call on a macro, it can run the macro to make things happen. A sub-macro is something that a regular macro can call. Why would you do this? Let's say you had the same sort of steps over and over and over again, and you would constantly use them. Imagine shuffling a deck of cards, and you were writing a macro that dealt with playing various types of games. You don't want to have to program in all the steps that it takes to shuffle a deck of cards over and over and over again. You just create the shuffle sub-macro, and any game that needs to shuffle then can use it. Here we're going to do this for error handling. We just have to add a new action in here, but that's not really an action, is it? It's its own kind of thing. Easy enough. This is where we finally head over to the program flow. We are going to break up the program flow by saying jump over to a sub-macro every time you have to do something, handle an error. And if we double-click the sub-macro, it's just going to ask us, here's the start of a sub-macro, what do we want to call it? And we'll call it process error. No space. And when we hit enter, we'll see we have the sub-macro here. We'd actually have to tab somewhere else. Enter is not going to get it. But we have the sub-macro here, and everything between there and the end of the sub-macro is its own program. So we are writing a program inside of a program. What we need to do is we need to make a decision in this sub-macro. Anytime we hit an error, is it an error that we predicted and can handle on our own? That means we need an if action. We're going to add a new action, and and we're going to say if. If this is an error number that we recognize, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, we'll do something else. So I hit if, and it wants to know what. Here's the what. If the macro error number is 7873, I'm just going to type this here, macro error, and you'll see the little box following me around at the bottom. What you can do is when you hit that box, I start typing, and eventually it figures out that we want number. If you just hit enter, it'll do the rest of the typing for you. Then I just have to type in equals 7873. So you can save some time with those autocomplete options. So now we have the if part. Well, what do we want to do if it is error number 7873? What we're going to do is we're going to use something called a message box. And that's just those little error kinds of boxes that pop up that tell you what's going on. What do we want our message to be from the message box? We're just going to type cannot find the specified table. This is much friendlier than that strange object situation that we had before. It was giving us errors about not locating a certain object. This makes a lot more sense. Cannot find the specified table. We'll fill out a little more information. Notice we've just moved on to our last page. We don't want the system to beep because it didn't find the table, but we could make that happen. The type deals with how it appears. If we do none, then it's just a plain box that opens up. Critical will have like a much more important danger sign. We're going to do warning with an exclamation point, and that causes us to see a little icon next to our message. We're going to be running it in a second, so instead of going crazy trying to describe it, hang in there a second so that you can see what warning looks like. So we've typed warning here. We click the new action button. They tell us we've completed this. So now we're going to go down to the add new action, and we're going to do something really important. If it hits this error, and it cannot find that table, instead of being in that situation where it goes into step mode and we have to figure out what's going on, there's no fixing the lack of a table. So we're going to specifically say stop macro. So that's the instruction that we add there. We are going to stop the macro so that they don't end up in that debugging mode, that step-by-step where it gives all the specifics of the error for us. It's just going to say cannot find the specified table, and it'll stop the macro right at that point. Remember, that only happens if the error number is 7873. What if it's not? What do we do if it's not 7873? Well, here we can do the add else option here. If it's 7873, then do this. Else, we'll click the add else button, and then we'll tell it what to do should it not be 7873. So here we are going to give a message box again. We'll just have it say something else. So the message box, we'll just use equal sign. We're essentially doing a formula here. Macro error, and it already says it, so I'll hit enter. Dot square bracket description. And that'll be our message. We will not beep. The system will not beep. This will be the warning again with an exclamation point. And then we need an action to go with this. We have a message box, but the message box on its own just gives us the information that's going to happen. We want something that will cause some sort of action to take place. So here we could add a new action. At this point, what would we want to do? We don't know. If we had said, if we had included in another if here, we could have some sort of action, but there's nothing to do. We don't know what error it is. It's just like, if it's this one, here's what we want to do: stop, display the message and stop. And this one, we don't even know if we want to stop. So we'll call the macro with a sub macro done at this point. We want it to do something next, but if we don't know what the error is, we can't handle it. So this will just catch them, tell us what the error was, and keep on along the instruction process without doing anything custom to this vague situation we're in. Here, just want to make sure that you catch the general flow of this. We have a sub macro, and if we close that little arrow, we don't see any of the sub macro. If we open it up, we have an if and an else. We can close off just the if section so we can look at what the else does. We could close the else so we could see that the general idea is that if it's number 7873, it's going to do something else, it'll do something else. We can open and close these to see as much detail as we want, and that allows you to see an awful lot of program without having to keep every single step open. There's just one problem with this, and we are really at the last step at this point. There's just one problem with this, which is we don't actually use the sub macro. Remember, we have a whole sub macro here called process error, and we never use it. So that's obviously a problem. And you're going to see what they do up here in the instructions is they're going to add something at the very top called on error. And we're going to go to that macro name. So I'm going to show how this is done. It's relatively easy here. It's just like the steps that we've had before. We're going to add a new action, and you'll see that's always at the bottom. There's no add action up at the top where we want to put it. See, here's where we want it to end up at the top, on error. There's no option up here to do that. So what you do is you go down to the bottom, you say add new action at the very, very bottom of the list. What's the action? We're going to go to the macro. We're out of sync on the instructions page here. What we want to do is we want to be able to go to that macro whenever there's an error. So here's our go-to options, but it doesn't say it directly. You can't go to it that way. I mean, I'm kind of cheating because it's at the very top of the page anyway. We're going to say that on an error we will go to something, and it moves it above the sub macro. So we started way at the bottom, but it's already bumped us up to above the sub macro. The reason being that sub macros always have to be at the end of a program list. So it's something that you can only just know. The software takes care of it for you. So in the macro name, we have this on error, we have the go to, and then we have a macro name, and we want to type in process error. You could have also chosen various other options here. Here we want macro name. And whenever there's an error, it goes to a macro name. That macro name is process error. So here we have something that is, we just put at the top, and we haven't even gotten it to the top yet. We're just going to put it at the top, and that alerts Access that as you run this macro, if you have an error, you are going to go to a macro name, and that macro name is process error. Problem is, it's not at the top, so the macro won't know what to do. Easy enough to fix. There's little green arrows on the side that let you move instructions up and down. So I'm going to move up, and it goes part of the way. Here's our on error, and it's halfway up the list. I'll do up again, and we have the open table, nothing more. We'll go up again. Now it's above the other. We'll go up a final time. It's above that comment. We've made it to the top. You can tell we made it to the top because there's no more up arrow. So we've used that up arrow to go all the way to the top. So what have we done? Big picture? We took what opened one table, opened another table, and we added a sub macro that handles the error. If it's a specific error, 7873, then it opens up this message box and stops the macro. Otherwise, it opens up this message box. Doesn't have anything that it really can do beyond that point, so just lets nature take its course. Here's the end of our if statement, the end of the sub macro. When do we use the sub macro? Well, if there's an error, says the top of this macro, if there's an error, then we'll go to the macro named process error. Let's see it in action. I'm just going to double click this. The same thing would happen if we were to close the database and open it again. This one specifically says that we can double click it here. Notice that book is currently renamed book test still, so that we should get an error here. When we double click it, no, I have to save this. I'm going to right click on mine and choose run. Oh, it's open, that's why. Make sure that you close the macro when you do that. I'm going to double click that, and it gives an error, doesn't know what the error is, and we get macro error description. Now notice that before that we had a different error number involved in the 70, so we're going to get to see that. Double clicking this, we're going to see macro error description, because when we had that mistake, it was a different number error. So it's checking to see if it was the number that matched up. It's not, so it runs the description instead. One last thing that we're going to fix before we submit this, we're going to click on book test. We're going to do rename. We're going to change it back to book. And they even give a warning that you really have to make sure you change book test back to book before you submit this for grading. That's a hugely important step. We save everything as it is. We close the database. And now it's time to submit it online. I upload my file. System's moving a little slow for this. I pick the database, make sure it has the textbooks are us or whatever custom name you had, and it's going to take a little while to open it up. We see that we've uploaded the right file. I'm going to click yes to submit. It's time to wait for our grade. And you'll see that the result's getting ready. We're going to finally see what we've gotten on this project. And not much surprise here, it's a 100% again. We've achieved all the things that we were looking to achieve on this. One thing that might be worth mentioning, and I'm doing this above and beyond the graded version, so that you don't have to carry through this on your own. If I were to open this up before, and I'm going to change this to handle a different error, all I would have to do in order to change the results is, I had 7873 over here. I'm going to, just so that you can see this, I'm going to delete the error handling and add it back in a minute. Now I'm going to save each of these things, close them all, and I'm going to run AutoExec. It's able to open them both. Close them both, and remember, this is just to see how you could fix the problem of getting one error message versus the other. If I rename this back to book test, and I try to open it, now we'll get the original problem because we're not handling the errors. I OK that. We see 7874 is the error that we're getting. 7874. So I'm going to close this, and I'll close the author table. And when we go back into design view, I'm going to change this from 7873 to 7874 and hit enter. I'm then going to add the step at the end for on error so that we can add error handling back into this. I wanted to go to a macro name, and that sub macro name was down here, process error. Process error. I'm going to move this up to the top, and we're going to try this one more time. And see what happens now. I save it. I close it. Now when we run AutoExec, it says cannot find the specified table. The reason I've taken the time to go through this is because clearly the textbook has an issue. It has us put 73 in when it should say 74. The message now reads cannot find the specified table, just as we'd predict, and instead of going into any sort of debug mode, it just automatically shuts it down. So that's why you might have had a little trouble with why does the message say what it says. Should have said 74 instead of 73 in the original message. However, I made sure that we followed along the exact steps so that when we hit this point, we'd still get our 100 out of 100 by doing exactly what they say. And now that's it. That is it. You have learned all that you need to learn to use Microsoft Access in almost all business situations. There are an additional number of chapters in the book that I may put bonus work on and additional videos on if you want to learn material beyond what the course requires. Same thing with the Excel series. But you are now finished with the last of the guided projects. Hopefully you followed along close enough to get hundreds in the book for all of these projects. And I will see you in the bonus content.